The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Alan Blumkin. I'm here with my good friend David Nemec for another session of David Nemec's Trivia and History. We're going to talk today about the 5 franchise moves in the 1950s. And welcome, David.
A pleasure to be with you once again, Al.
Yeah. So you want to start with the Braves?
Yeah, that's an interesting team to start with because the Braves had been really the Braves franchise more or less began in 1871 in Boston. The 1871 team was in the National Association, which is considered by many to be a major league, by others not so. It'll probably always be cause for debate, but nevertheless, the team that started in Boston in 1871 remained in Boston and was very strong in the 19th century, won a number of pennants. In the 20th century, it ran into rough going after the Arthur Soden, the owner of the team early in the century, refused to hike players' salaries to keep them from jumping to the American League, and lost what had been a very good team in the late 1890s to American League clubs, including Boston. What was soon to become the Red Sox inherited a couple of players from the old Braves. And they only really won a pennant twice in Boston in the 20th century, 1914 and again in 1948. But in 48, they were drawing pretty well. They were still a popular team in Boston, and yet they became the very first team subsequent to 1902 to move its franchise.
Well, weren't they second fiddle to the Red Sox most of the time? Except maybe when the Red Sox were terrible in the 1920s and early 30s, yeah.
Unfortunately, the Braves were much better. They really never put together much of a team. They had some decent teams, but they really weren't. Once they left the teens and moved into the 20s, they were seldom in contention. The team started to strengthen very quickly after the Second World War when they hired Billy Southworth, who had been dumped by St. Louis, which was a bad mistake on St. Louis' part, because Southworth was an excellent manager. And by 1948, he put together a team that won the National League pennant, played in the World Series, and might well have won the World Series if it hadn't suffered a key injury at the tail end of the season when Jeff Heath broke his ankle sliding in the home and had to be replaced by Marv Rickard, who had really been a minor leaguer.
Yeah, Stanky missed half the season that year.
And he did. They lost Stanky for half the year. Put Stanky and Heath in the lineup against the 48 Indians, and it would have been it was a close series as it was. The Braves won the first game, 1-0. But after 48, they had a pretty good season in 49, and then they quickly started to go in the doldrums. And the Red Sox were strengthening, becoming stronger and stronger each year. They had, big drawing cards like Ted Williams and Mel Parnell and Johnny Pesky. They had pretty solid teams, and the Braves were stumbling along in the middle of the pack. And you can tell us about what you think the final motivator was to make them move from Boston to Milwaukee.
Well, in 1952, they drew 281,000. That was their last year in Boston. Warren Spahn lost 19 games. He was 14-19 with a 2.98 ERA. And what happened basically was that Bill Veeck wanted to move the Browns to Milwaukee, where he had major success with the minor league Milwaukee Brewers. And the owners hated Bill Veeck. He was a maverick to them, and so they pressured Lou Perini owned the Braves, to move them from Boston to Milwaukee, to prevent Veeck from moving to Milwaukee. And this was done 2 weeks before the season started. Because one of the ironic things about it, that Joe Aycock has a 1953 bowling card. It pictures him with a cap with a B, and he never played a minute for the Boston Braves. That's how late this move was done. And they flip-flop, National League flip-flop the schedules of the Pirates and the Braves, so the Braves could, play the Cubs and the Reds and the Cardinals earlier than having to play the Eastern teams. And the Braves, of course, were a tremendous success in Milwaukee for quite a few years. And they drew almost, I think it was 1,800,000 the first year. And they drew tons of people, and the players were welcomed there like heroes. They couldn't do enough for the players. They went out to win 2 pennants from one World Series. And then a few years later, the bottom dropped out, and they went to Atlanta. But 281,000 attendance isn't major league. And since the Red Sox, basically, I feel it's always been the prime franchise there. Not too many people missed the Braves when they moved, but this was the first one. It shook. The last move before this was in 1903 when Baltimore, some people still dispute this, that they were the predecessors of the Yankees. But America got a franchise in Baltimore in 1901, 1902, and 1903 it was in New York.
Yeah. So half a century passed before a team moved again.
Yeah,
and that half century, that kind of stability in professional sports has existed in no other professional sport ever for that length of time. Baseball was remarkable, really, when you think about it, because of all, the movement since and changing leagues, interleague. Everything about the game has been up for grabs pretty much ever since the Braves broke the logjam and moved to Milwaukee. And then the second move came very soon thereafter when Bill Veeck finally got his wish to leave St. Louis. St. Louis, the Browns, had been the dominant team in St. Louis early in the 20th century. It was their ballpark that the Cardinals were renting, and they were Cardinals, because the Cardinals had moved from Robeson Field, last all wooden ballpark in 1919, to Sportsman's Park, which was then in use known by the Browns, and the Cardinals were left the sole tenant of Sportsman's Park after the Browns moved to Baltimore.
No, the thing is that one of the key events leading up to all of this was that Branch Rickey was working for the Browns as a general manager of sorts, I guess. And they had a new owner named Phil Ball who owned the St. Louis Federal League team. He was allowed to buy the Browns in the settlement after the Federal League collapsed after 1915. And Ball and Rickey got into it. And so Ball fired Rickey, and he showed up a couple of weeks later as a general manager of the Cardinals, where he had tremendous success until he left for the Dodgers after 1942. After 1941, I think it was, yeah. And,
he did.
And that was the moment. I mean, the Browns had one team that missed by a game in 1922.
And that was probably their best team ever.
Yeah.
Generally considered to be their best team. But they won the pennant in '44, which was their first pennant. They were the last of the 16 franchises that entered the 20th century, the American League and National League, eight teams in each league. They were the last franchise to win a pennant in the 20th century, in '44, when they finally came through.
That was during the war. Yeah.
During the war, and they came close again in '45. And but after that, the bottom fell out. The team wasn't ever a contender again, or even really a contender. And
no, they dealt Ellis Kinder and Vern Stevens to the Red Sox because they needed money to go on. The ownership at that time. Vec bought them. Vec sold the Indians in 1949 because he needed the money for a divorce. He bought the Browns in 1951 and did things like send Eddie Gaedel, a midget, up and have grandstand managers. They were the fans in the grandstand say yes or no on strategy, and he was bringing in a lot of old Cardinals like Marty Marion and Dizzy Dean to announce, and Harry Burkeen to coach, and he was trying to grab all these Cardinal icons. And what happened basically was because he thought he could run, the owner of the Cardinals at the time, a man named Fred Sy, because Sy had been convicted of income tax evasion. And Sy had to sell the team. And he sold it to Gussie Busch and Anheuser-Busch Empire. And Vec said in his book, Vec is in Rec, he said just as soon as he learned that Gussie Busch had bought the team, he said he knew he was finished in St. Louis. And what's ironic is that they wouldn't let him move to Baltimore, the American League. They only let the Browns move. They only agreed to let the Browns move to Baltimore was if Vec sold out.
Yeah, that was unfortunate because if Vec had brought that team into Baltimore, I think it would have been a much more of a contender very quickly. As it was, they struggled throughout the 50s until finally near the end of the decade they were putting a pretty good product on the field and gave the Yankees a real run for their money in 1960 and became a strong team in the 60s and remained a strong team for the most part throughout the 20th century. Now, of course, Baltimore is really struggling.
Yeah, they had a team in 1888 that started off with 21 straight losses. And somebody asked me what I thought about that. I said they're channeling their inner Browns DNA. Yeah. But the trend was, and throughout the time is when all these teams were moving out of what were two-team cities. Yeah, they were because baseball. Once TV came into existence, it had a tremendous impact on the minor leagues, minor league attendance. The minor leagues shrunk by, there were like over 50 minor leagues in 1946, and by the end of the decade, the number was falling, and by the mid-50s, it had dropped way down. Baseball was losing in popularity. It started losing really in the 1950s to pro football. And the NFL, I think by the end of the 50s, was considered the upcoming, it would be the top professional sport.
and this had a really tremendous impact on baseball. And teams now began to realize, even teams in one city, one team cities like Cleveland, just 2 years after winning the pennant in 1954, Cleveland was already starting to look around and think about maybe they're going to be the next to move. And fortunately, it's never going to come to pass in Cleveland, but they came close to moving. White Sox came close to moving. A lot of teams over the years have come close to moving. But the 50s really set the thing off very quickly. And the next thing to move was the A's, who were based in Philadelphia from 1901 through 1954. And had been in the Mac family and Shive family for, almost for their entire time of existence. And by 1954, the A's were really a bad team. I had the fortune to be going to high school in West Palm Beach at the time, and West Palm Beach was the spring training center for the Philadelphia A's. Connie Mack Stadium was used by the high school team, which I played for, and we would wait outside. We watched the end of their exhibition games, the A's exhibition games, against teams like the Dodgers and the Yankees, before we could get on the field of practice. And we saw what I think was the worst baseball team, major league team I've ever seen. There were guys on that team that couldn't hit the ball out of the infield in batting practice. It was really something to watch. They had a guy named Bill Wilson, who was one of their key power hitters, but he had only, he had so many holes in his swing that, and Lou Limmer was another guy who had good power, also with tremendous holes in his swing. And I know all these
guys from their baseball cards. Yeah.
Right.
They had a team in 1952 that finished a couple of games over 500, led by Bobby Shantz, where he won 24 games and won the AL MVP, but he hurt his arm the next year. And basically was done for a few years until he was traded to the Yankees. They had a decent team. They had Ferris Fain, who was a two-time batting title winner, and a tremendous record for getting on base. He's I think, in the top 15, 20 of players that played a while for on-base percentage. And he wanted more money after 1952 than Mac was willing to give, so they sent him to the White Sox right before the 53 season, essentially for Eddie Robinson.
Yeah.
Robinson turned out to be a vagabond. He put up very good numbers quite a few times, and he was always traded. And they had Pete Suter, Eddie Joost. The outfield was Gus Zernial, and Dave Philly. After Philly hit 303 in 1954, they sent him to the Indians for.
Actually, he had 303. Yeah, 303 the year before, I think in 53, because for the Indians, he was hitting the 230s.
Yeah, they gave up three pitches and nobody ever heard of him.
Yeah.
And then Elmer Vallo was another one that won. He and Zernial wound up going to Kansas City with the A's. And their pitching, once he got past Shantz, their pitching was awful.
It was awful. It really was awful. But they did have one. They finally integrated in 54, and they had Vic Power, who I could see at spring training. This guy really was a ball player. He really had speed, and he hit with power. He was very graceful first baseman. He could play the outfield. He could probably play almost any position on the diamond. And he was, to me, their standout player in spring training. But they also had another guy named Jim Finnegan, who nobody thought much about in spring training. But he turned out to be the Rookie of the Year in '54. He never had a season even close to it again. But I remember watching him in spring training, and nobody thought anything much of was going to come from him, except that he was going to make the team because they really had nobody else. The guy I felt sorry for was Pete Suter, who'd been with the club all throughout his career. In fact, Pete still holds the record for the most games played in an A's uniform, well, never having played in another major league uniform. And he went with the A's after they left Philadelphia. He went over to Kansas City, and the A's were doomed from day one when the season opened. And they would happen to pick a year. It happened to be a year when Cleveland Yankees and the White Sox all finished with excellent records. Even the White Sox in third place finished with a record that would have been good enough to win the
pennant. They won 94 games, and the fourth place team was the Red Sox, who won 69.
Yeah, so the greatest difference between a third and fourth team ever. And, the Red Sox were in the first division with
yeah, and if I remember correctly, the Indians beat them 20 out of 22 times.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
In fact, I was at a Yankee game in 1955, and late in September. I was 12, and me and my friend went up by ourselves from Queens, and this is before school started, obviously, and Whitey Ford pitched a one-hitter. He pitched a no-hitter into the seventh inning, and Finnegan hit a ground rule double, and that was the only hit he gave up. But Vic Power was in a Yankee chain, and George Weiss decided to get rid of him. Powell was a very dark-skinned Puerto Rican, and his girlfriend at the time was a light-skinned Puerto Rican. And Weiss didn't like that. And he was also considered too flashy for the Yankees. That's why when they sent him and Finnegan, a couple of others over to the A's for Eddie Robinson, who was with the A's for just the 1 year in 1953, and pitcher Harry Bird, who was considered by some people Rookie of the Year in 1952, and then wound up a 20-game loser in 1953.
Yeah.
They looked like a bird.
Yeah, they were quite a team. But Eddie Juice had the misfortune to be a player manager. In fact, even though he played very little.
Joe DeMaestri became the regular shortstop.
Yeah, he became the regular shortstop, and the team really, really struggled from the starting gate, and I thought they made I think even at the time as a kid, I was thinking, okay, well, the Braves moved to Milwaukee. That makes some sense. Milwaukee's always been a good baseball town. The Browns moved to Baltimore. Baltimore's always been a good baseball town. But the A's moved to Kansas City. And Kansas City was a Yankees farm team, wasn't it, at the time?
Yeah, well, also one thing I wanted to mention was that last year in Philadelphia, Arlo Porter Carrero, who was a rookie, led the team in wins with 9.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty good.
What happened with the move? That Del Webb, who was the co-owner of the Yankees, was in bed with this investor, Ronald Johnson. And Johnson had what became the owner of Yankee Stadium. And Webb and Topping, the other Yankee owner, ran the American League at that point. And they pushed for Arnold Johnson to get the franchise because they had so many business dealings with him. And the American League, thumbed their noses, and And they, put him in. I think there's only one or two owners that were opposed to him, and he hired, former Yankees and executives, whoever, and they became known for the next 6 years until Johnson died in 1960 from a heart attack. And then when Finley bought the A's, the trading with the Yankees stopped. Because Yankees essentially operated the A's in Kansas City when Johnson was the owner as a farm team.
Yeah, it really did continue to be a farm team. Yeah, it was amazing how, and nobody did anything to stop it. Nobody stepped in. Everybody knew what the Yankees were doing.
Well, the Yankees were running the league, just like Walter O'Malley was running the National League, Topping and Webb were running the American League. Yeah, and the American League president was Will Harridge, and the National League president was Still Frick, wasn't it, or what? Who was it? No, Warren Giles. Oh, Warren Giles. Okay, Giles took over for Frick. Yeah, Frick was commissioner, and neither Giles nor Harris did anything really to put a damper on it. To show you just one example of how much the Yankees had control of baseball. We may have discussed this before. I don't know if we have or not, but in 1949, in the last game of the season, both the Dodgers and the last game of the season, both the American League and National League had the last game of the season was going to decide the pennant. It had potential to decide the pennant. And in the American League, am I wrong on this, or was it 1950? I think it may have been 50 when I'm pretty sure it was 49. It was 49. They won. Yankees won the last two games of the season at Yankee Stadium. Right. They lost in the last two games of the season. Will Harridge allowed the Yankees to have 6 umpires for the first time in Major League history in a regular season game. They had foul line umpires, and they had, as they do now in World Series games, and they had four regular umpires and two second division teams. I know Washington was one of them, and Philadelphia may have been the other one. I think. Yeah, it was because they were playing. They were separated into East-West divisions. Yeah, they were. Yeah. So it would have been East Washington and Philadelphia. They only had 2 umpires, and that's how much the Yankees. Yeah, that's how much the Yankees had control of the American League. Basically, the controlling owners had control over what the league presidents did and what the commissioner did. Ford Frick's famous statement that he used all the time when he was asked about some situation when he was commissioner, he said it's a league matter. Yeah, right. Yeah, and it amazes me that all these league presidents have made the Hall of Fame, and even Ford Frick, when he was commissioner, I can't really look back and find much that he did to improve the game or. No, the only thing he did that was really good was back Jackie Robinson. Yeah. That well, on that score alone, probably that would be almost get him into the Hall of Fame, but. Well, they put Bowie, Kuhn, and Seelig into the Hall of Fame. So I know. Yeah. And Seelig never should be in the Hall of Fame. But that's another story. Yeah, neither should Bowie Kuhn. What did he ever do? Yeah. No, at least didn't do anything really detrimental like Seelig did. Yeah, well, that's a topic for another program.
Yeah, or several actually. But
Yeah.
we won't. Let's not go there today. Let's stay with what we're doing.
Yeah.
And,
Okay. And so the A's, and just as soon as Finley bought the team, I read a very good book a few months ago on the history of the Kansas City A's. And Finley basically, just as soon as he bought the team, wanted to move them. He wanted to move them to Louisville. He wanted to move them to Dallas. He wanted to get Kansas City very quickly. And then finally, after 1967, he moved to Oakland. And then they got the Royals 2 years ago in 1969.
Yeah, Kansas City was rewarded, actually. They really ended up, coming out way ahead.
Yeah.
When the expansion team came in.
But
it was the strongest expansion team formed at that point in time by far.
You look at that. You look at that. The A's rosters when they were in Kansas City before Finley came around. You'd see all the Yankees. I mean, they made a trade in 1959 when they got Hector Lopez and Ralph Terry for Jerry Lumpy, who Stengel couldn't stand, and Tom Sturtevant and Johnny Cooks, both of whom had bad arms.
Yeah.
I did a podcast with Ralph Terry a couple of years ago, and I asked him about that. He originally signed with the Yankees, then was sent to Kansas City, I think, with the Billy Martin trade. Then, he said, he was sent down there they sent to the A's for seasoning. Yeah. Well, once in a while, the A's would get somebody with some pop or some ability, and they did get Bob Sturr for a while on rental. They had Roger Maris.
Yeah, and they had Roger Maris, which Cleveland traded to him. Cleveland traded to the A's, and they got Power and Woody Held in the deal, which wasn't a bad deal at the time, but nobody really saw Maris coming with the Indians, and certainly none of the A's didn't see him coming either. That be the kind of power hitter he was, and once he came to the Yankees, he became, a very, very strong, force in the game, and it's unfortunate, really, that Maris that he did set the record in 1961. So I think if he had failed to set the record, he probably would have had a greater career.
Yeah.
All in all.
I think that the stress from
too
that.
Much for him to handle.
Yeah. The stress from that. I mean, these writers have seen the same stuff day after day after day, and watch a 260 hitter like you chasing this record, and his hair was falling out. Yeah.
No, it was.
He wound up dying at the age of 51. I think a lot of it was from the stress he had during his time with the Yankees. But the Yankees, when they got him, they gave up Norm Seaburn, who Stengel didn't like. This is after 1959, because he messed up a couple of fly balls in the 1958 World Series. Don Larson, the great perfect game pitcher, who proceeded to go 1-10 with the Kansas City A's and wind up a career with an 81-91 record. And John Larson got the Hall of Fame votes every year he was on the ballot. I mean, I found this out on Baseball Reference. I was stunned by that. They got Hank Bauer, who was 37 years old and done as a player, lived in a Kansas City suburb, and he wanted to go home. And the fourth one went on to immortality with the Mets, marvelous Mark Throneberry.
Yeah. Yeah. No, those are.
Yeah.
Those are the years.
This was the kind of trade that they made with Kansas City all the time. But
nobody could put a stop to it.
Yeah, the A's the last year they were in Philly drew a whopping 306,000.
No, and there were years the St. Louis Browns drew less than that when they were in St. Louis. So they really were a really bad franchise by the time they moved to Kansas City.
Well, the Browns. The Browns in 1935 supposedly drew 81,000. But I asked for a couple of St. Louis people to on conventions whether the sporting news had game-by-game attendance. I was told no. There's no record of that anywhere. And you had an extremely hot summer, you had a depression, and you had no night games. A terrible team.
Yeah.
So all those factors, played into that.
Yeah.
But,
no, A's didn't have any excuses at all because they'd been, they'd been a very good team in '48.
Yeah.
It was their last, I think, the really last gasp even as a contender as late as August. After that, although they did have a first division team, they really were never a contender. And by '54, they were really just a very terrible team in total disarray. And unfortunately, Kansas City got that team, and I always felt sorry for the fans in Kansas City after that.
Well, it was also ironic. The Braves spent 13 seasons in Milwaukee and never had a losing record. The A's spent 13 years in Kansas City and never had a winning record.
Really, I didn't know that. That's an amazing.
Yeah, their best year was 1958 when Bob Cerv had his big year and they won 73 games. That was their best year in Kansas City.
Wow, by far.
Oh, yeah.
No. Then we had the other two teams left that moved. And then, the two most controversial moves, certainly, from maybe ever, certainly the Giants and Dodgers both moved from the New York area. Dodgers from Brooklyn and the Giants from their stadium was based at Polo Grounds in Manhattan. And
well, the Giants after the Giants won the World Series in 1954, they started falling off, and by 1956 they were a sixth-place team with basically only two assets, Willie Mays and Johnny Antonelli. And they were going to move to Minneapolis, the stadium that the Twins first played in, the old Metropolitan Stadium in Minneapolis, was built for the Giants because the Giants controlled the territory. And once what happened was when the Dodgers decided, O'Malley decided to go to L.A., he convinced Howard Stone among the Giants to move to San Francisco.
Yeah.
Minnesota got the Twins. They got the original Washington Senators who became the Twins. But the blows here that the people felt, who, especially the Dodgers, who were a Brooklyn institution, were just there's still people out there because this is 64 years ago. There's people older than me that still haven't gotten over the Dodgers moving.
No, I don't think they really. It's amazing that O'Malley could not persuade.
Robert Moses, who was running the city for Public Works, and Moses was not a sports fan at all. He was one of the biggest SOBs of all time. And O'Malley wanted the area where the Brooklyn Nets, the Barclays Center in downtown Brooklyn, he wanted that because Ebbetsfield was the neighborhood around Ebbetsfield. This happened with a lot of what they call the classic ballparks. The neighborhoods around these places deteriorated. And the Dodgers, were in a 32,000 seat stadium in Ebbetsfield, no parking, And a lot of the Dodger fans who had any sort of money moved out to Long Island. This is what they stopped coming to Ebbets Field, and this is the type of fan that O'Malley wanted. They supposedly Moses offered O'Malley the area where Shea Stadium was built. And by that time, the L.A. was giving O'Malley anything he wanted.
Yeah, and they gave him Chavez Ravine, and
they kicked people out of that area because of the stadium.
It's a very tragic story. I read a book recently about how what happened to people who lived in that area, some of whom refused to move under any circumstances, and tried to stay till the bitter end.
Eminent domain. They were claiming the people who wanted the land were claiming eminent domain, which
they had a winning case. But it didn't win, and it's a sad story, but it was inevitable, unfortunately. And the Giants story was equally sad, but for a different reason. They played their opened up and sealed stadium, which wasn't really big enough to house a major league team attendance-wise. It was an excellent park and in a good section of San Francisco, and rather easy section to reach from almost every direction. And they crazily ended up, and it's a long story and never a very flattering one in San Francisco circles to the San Francisco politicians of that time. Well, how they ended up in the Candlestick Park, in one of the worst areas of the city to build a ballpark. And it was, having gone, I remember the first time I went to a game there was in 1969. It was a game in early July, and we had to wear jackets to the game. We had to wear jackets. It was a night game against Montreal, and believe me, it was cold.
The only time, Al Anderson and I made 4 baseball trips in the 70s. We took a schedule and drive from place to place. So when we got to California, our time was limited. So we saw the 3 parks in Southern California, and when we went to Northern California, the A's were in. So we had to sacrifice Candlestick Park. But before one of the A's games, we went out to Candlestick Park. They were cleaning it up after an exhibition football game, and the wind was just blowing all the papers and all the junk all over the place. We stayed there for about 20 minutes just to watch this. And then when the Sabre had the 1998 convention in San Francisco, the night game was a Friday night. The Major League game was a Friday night game at Candlestick Park. And I heard the weather is 63 degrees and the wind was something like 30 miles an hour. So I sold my ticket. I said, you think I'm going to sit through 3 hours out there in that kind of weather? You're nuts. I can do that at Shea Stadium anytime.
So you never got to a game in Candlestick?
No. So when the people came back after the game ended, a number of them told me I made the right choice.
Yeah, you did. I mean, it was brutal out there. I used to go to day games frequently, but I never again went to a night game there.
Because
it was awful.
I referred to Shea Stadium quite a few times as Candlestick East.
Yeah, Oakland Park can get very cold and windy.
I know
too.
that. Yeah.
It's not, and I was there once when the temperature dropped into the low 40s, and this was in August. It was a night game. And believe me, we were huddling. We were huddling to try to stick it out. It was a good game, but the weather could go crazy out there.
There was there was a book that came out a number of years ago on the original San Francisco Giants, and the author interviewed every player on the 58 team except for the catcher Bob Schmidt. He even got Willie Mays.
Wow, that's not easy.
To a man, they said that they should have double-decked Sealed Stadium.
Yeah, they really should have. They really should have. I don't know why they didn't. It was a very stupid decision. But political decision all the way. And yeah, well, this has been an interesting hour, I think. And
there are a lot of people who, I think O'Malley is in the Hall of Fame because he opened up the California to Major League Baseball. And there's also I have a book somewhere came out a number of years ago in the history of the Angels, and the 4 years that they were tenants of the Dodgers from '62 through '65, O'Malley treated them very, very badly.
Yeah.
So I mean, he was who he was, and the only thing he was interested in was making money. And as I said, LA gave the store away, and the franchise has been extremely successful over the years.
Well, it's had a couple rocky moments, but basically it's been a strong franchise, and it's a good park. It's I think it's one of the better parks in the major league.
I've seen a couple of games there. Yeah.
It's
the third oldest behind Fenway and Wrigley.
Yeah, I know. It's. And I've seen. Well, I've been to Fenway, I've been to Wrigley, I've been to. And they're really. What's the fourth oldest park?
Fourth oldest is I think it's Anaheim Stadium.
Anaheim, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
That opened in 1966 when the Angels moved there. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be the fourth. Then,
yeah.
Right.
Fifth is the Oakland Coliseum. Yeah.
Well,
if they don't act quickly there, they might wind up in Las Vegas like the Raiders football team.
They may. I hope not, because Oakland really is a good baseball city, and I've always enjoyed the A's. I lived in the Bay Area. I was never a Giants fan. I was an A's fan, and I like the park. I like going to games there. It was easy to reach, even from San Francisco where I was living. Much easier to reach than it was to go to Candlestick. And I went to a lot of games at both parks, but enjoyed myself much more at the A's Park. Yeah,
I saw a game in Kansas City Municipal in 1972 when there's the Royals were there. It was the last year before Royal Stadium, and you couldn't park there. You had to pay a homeowner to park on their lawn. That's how bad the parking was there.
I'm sorry, where was this?
This is Kansas City Municipal Stadium.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, because the A's Park, you can find street parking if you go to the Oakland Coliseum.
Yeah.
And it's not that far a walk at all. You used to be able to find street parking at Candlestick too. At the new park, you can't. You really have to go by public transportation if you're smart. You're foolish if you try to drive there. But
if you drive to Yankee Stadium and park in the stadium, it cost $35 a dozen years ago. God knows what they're charging now.
Oh my, I know. Probably at least 50 something.
Yeah. All right. This has been a really fun session.
It has. I really enjoyed it.
It's always a pleasure doing these things with you.
It is. I enjoy it too, and I look forward to them.
Okay.
Let's do it again soon.
Okay. Give my best to Marilyn.
I will.
Okay.
And same to you.
Good night, everybody.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.